Welcome back to Kelly's Take Two Pre-Licensing Review, all about agency contracts. Now we're going to dive into working with a buyer and the various arrangements and agency contracts you may use when you're working with a buyer in North Carolina. In North Carolina, you are permitted to have an oral or verbal buyer agency agreement. You could also have an exclusive buyer agency agreement. And then there are sometimes you may end up working with a buyer as a customer. We call that sub-agency. So let's dive in and take some notes. Go ahead and get your graphic organizer set up and we'll start typing it out. All right, here we go. So when you have an oral buyer agency agreement, the agent still owes fiduciary duties to that buyer. But the buyer does not have any commitment to the agent. Why? Because oral buyer agency agreements must be non-exclusive and have no termination date. So you can't put pressure on a buyer and say, well, this will terminate in 3 weeks or some such thing. So they can't have a termination date, an oral buyer agency agreement. Oral buyer agency agreement should be express. Of course, express means expression. So it could be in an oral buyer agency agreement, the terms, well, I'll add the word terms. The terms should be expressed, meaning they should be stated. So let's go ahead and fix that. Terms should be expressed. And include permission for dual agency and outline how compensation will be earned. Very good. An oral buyer agency agreement must be reduced to writing prior to, this is new language, prior to preparation of offer. We've been saying presentation of offer, but now we're really going towards preparation of an offer. So before you start writing one up, putting all the documents together, make sure that you can reduce this buyer agency agreement to writing. If the buyer refuses to put it in writing, if the buyer refuses to complete a written buyer agency agreement prior to preparation of offer, the agent may no longer represent them. In a nutshell. Now, that's pretty much how it's going to rock and roll. There is a chance that they could ask to be the seller sub-agent, but pretty much it's going to rock and roll. That agent, brass tacks, can no longer represent this buyer. All right, let's go over here to exclusive buyer agency. This is where you have an exclusive broker-client relationship. So you have one broker / firm hired to rep the buyer. The buyer agrees to not work with other firms. Good. All agents inside are on the buyer's team. Same with the listing agreement, because we're one big what? One big family. We are family. One big family. Okay. All right. We want, when it comes to an exclusive buyer agency agreement, it will be written. So an exclusive buyer agency agreement is in writing and will include the following. Include the following special features. Okay, let's, like we did with the listing agreement up there, let's write down some special features of an exclusive buyer agency agreement. Here we go. First of all, we're going to, and this is different than the listing agreement. So first of all, we are going to note the location and type of property sought. So are we looking for commercial, residential? Are we looking in Buncombe County, Henderson County, or all of Western North Carolina? So we're going to write that in. There's a little provision in there regarding other, this is a good one, other potential buyers, meaning that the firm will have other buyers that agents inside of the firm are working with that are going to look at the same property and probably make offers on the same property as this particular buyer. And by signing this exclusive buyer agency agreement, the buyer's giving us permission or acknowledging that that could happen. And guys, technically, you could also, as an individual agent, have two different buyers who are looking at the same property and interested in making an offer on the same property. Ooh, technically, you're allowed to do that. Now, whether or not you're comfortable with it or not is another story. And naturally, you're going to want to talk that through with your broker in charge. But that's what other potential buyers means. It's a special feature of the buyer agency agreement. Another part in the buyer agency agreement that is a special feature would be something called other professional advice. In this provision, we're going to let the buyer know that if they need other professional advice from an attorney, an accountant, an insurance provider, a home inspector, we're going to send them to that particular professional and not act like we know everything. We got to send them to talk with some professionals. All right, another provision is confidentiality. What does that mean? That means that we're going to let the buyer know that the terms of their offer will be confidential, that we in North Carolina are not allowed to share terms of offers without the express permission from the offeror. That would be the buyer. Highly unlikely, but that's the rule. Now, it goes on to say that a seller is not held to this same law because the Real Estate Commission is the licensing board. They can dictate how we behave, but they can't really dictate how the general public behaves. So there's a little warning in there given to the buyers regarding sellers being able to share their terms. It's very unlikely that that happens, but it is in there just in case. And then this is an interesting one that's unique to the buyer agency agreement. The buyer is warned about potential surveillance. So let's write that down. So we've got a surveillance warning. Wow. What does that mean? That's letting the buyer know that nowadays, so many people have cameras on their property, outside, inside, and that to keep that into consideration. And even though it is against the law to record somebody's audio without permission, it is not against the law to record their image. So beware about that. All right, and just like I told you about the listing agreement, we now have a wire fraud warning as well as part of that agreement. Okay, very good. That is pretty much all I have for you on the buyer agency agreement. Let's talk about when we are representing a customer as a paper pusher. Remember, if you're representing a customer, you are on the seller's team. And a good example for this is if you happen to get into subdivision sales, sometimes the developer will want that agent only to represent them. That means any buyers coming through, we can help them with the process of buying one of the homes in this new subdivision, but our fiduciary duties are owed to the developer, the seller, the owner of that subdivision. So let's talk about this one. So here we go. Agents can provide many of the same services as a buyer's agent. Think paper pusher. Agents must be fair, honest, and disclose material facts to this customer. Okay. Agents must disclose seller only agency or seller sub agency prior to the buyer divulging personal, financial, or motivational information. Very good. Remember that agents will not complete a CMA for a buyer customer, only for a buyer client. Okay, so what kind of information can they share? They can just print out what I call raw data and talk about what's happening in the market generally and let that buyer customer kind of analyze that information, that data on their own. All right, I hope you found that helpful, this small discussion on working with buyers using various types of buyer agency agreements. When we get back together again, we're going to talk about the duties that we owe as a listing agent to the seller beyond our fiduciary duties. So what are some of those tasks that we're going to complete on behalf of a seller, as well as some of the tasks we're going to make sure we complete on behalf of a buyer. So hope to see you right back. Remember to click that subscribe button, and I'll see you shortly.